So Arnold Rothstein, labor racketeer, gambler, a fixer, bootlegger, one of the first to realize that prohibition was a business opportunity. Alleged to have fixed the 1919 World Series, known as the Brain and the Big Bankroll. He would also mentor Meyer Lansky and Charles Lucky Luciano, both of whom were major heroin dealers. And they would go on to create the syndicate and dominate organized crime for the next generation. He would also pioneer the smuggling of huge lots of narcotics from Europe, ton, half ton, mainly by buying from legitimate pharmaceutical companies like Merck. And although the ring he created was the largest exposed to date, it was not the first. They were forming as far back as 1917 and already fighting over territory. And the method that he created, smuggling tons, that wouldn't last long neither. I think the last huge seizure was 1931. There was a ton or 2 tons. After that, it would break down. 20 kilos, 10 kilos for around 45 years. And you wouldn't see that type of volume again to the late 1970s when the Cali cartel came to New York City. So Arnold Rothstein shot on November 4th, 1928, and he dies 2 days later. Leo Ketchner, who's Rothstein's biographer, speculated that Rothstein gave up rum running and was looking for a new source of income with less violence and landed on narcotics. If that is true, then he chose poorly. Like I said earlier, the public did not see narcotics as another harmless vice like gambling and alcohol. And it became violent pretty quick, and it stayed that way to this day. So Rothstein first comes to the attention of the feds for narcotics in July of 1926. On July 13, 1926, Charles Weber and William Vacuda are arrested with 1,220 pounds of heroin, cocaine, and morphine. And that's a lot. Even today, that's a lot. And Rothstein posted bond for both men and attended the trial. For a man who broke the law for a living and was known as a criminal mastermind, this shows a huge amount of indiscretion. He's practically telegraphing his involvement. And both men in this case will receive 8 years, so they could not buy their way out. Prosecutors had evidence that this ring had introduced 2 tons into the city over the last year. Legs Diamond, one of the most violent guys of the era, is alleged to have been the purchaser in Berlin, but he would not be charged in this case. He would be charged in another case in 1927, and he would also be bailed out by Arnold. So that draws in the feds, and it leads into Arnold. United States Attorney Charles H. Tudor, a recent appointee to the Southern District of New York and an anti-corruption crusader, would make Arnold the target of a narcotics investigation and was on the verge of an indictment when Rothstein was killed. And you got to remember, this is 1920s New York. And there were a few people, few people in local government who want to see this case solved. Rothstein was a powerful guy dealing with a lot of powerful people who would not want their laundry aired in public. So if you were a detective working on this case, it wouldn't do your career any good to try and solve it. So the United States Attorney Tootle, he demands all the files from the local DA, the police department, and he starts to raid Arnold Rothstein's offices without giving notice to anybody. And he doesn't use anybody local, no NYPD, no local federal narcotics agents, which turns out that he's lucky he did not. And with the information discovered in those raids, he would start to roll this ring up. And he starts right away. On December 8th, he seizes 2 trunks in Grand Central Station containing $2 million worth of narcotics. December 28th, 2 weeks later, the largest narcotics seizure to date, between 4 and 5 million. This case would also draw the attention of Congressman Stephen J. Porter, a principal advocate for the creation of a separate narcotics organization. The Porter Bill of 1925, which banned the manufacturing of heroin in the United States, bears his name. He brought with him to New York Colonel Larry G. Nutt, the head of Federal Narcotics Enforcement in the United States. So Tootle convenes a grand jury, and he promises to expose police corruption, politicians, yada, yada, yada. And it turns out most of that evidence was destroyed. But he drops a bombshell. Turns out the son of Colonel Larry G. Nutt, the head of Federal Narcotics Enforcement, was also a lawyer for Arnold Rothstein and represented him in a tax case against the Treasury Department, his father's employer. Colonel Nutt's son-in-law had also borrowed over $6,000 from Arnold, which looked like it probably was a bribe. It also turns out the New York office of the Narcotics Division was padding their arrest reports to make it seem like they were doing more than they were. So the case is never solved. No one gets exposed. Only Colonel Nutt gets exposed. He's the only casualty. He gets demoted. No politicians, no police, no judges, nobody's indicted. Congressman Stephen J. Porter gets what he wanted. The case exposes how European countries are not living up to their treaty obligations to restrict narcotics selling and enforce narcotics laws. And he's one of the principal proponents of creating a separate unit to enforce narcotics laws inside the United States. And he gets what he wants. On July 30th, 1930, Congress will create the FBN. And on September 23rd, Harry Anslinger would become the first commissioner.